Blood trickled down her cheek. The stunned silence in the first-class cabin was deafening. Zoe Montgomery, a billionaire tech CEO, a woman who had built an empire from nothing, had just been slapped by a flight attendant. A flight attendant who had no idea she was about to become the woman who would own the airline. What happens when the barriers of wealth and power crumble beneath the weight of discrimination? How does a woman who has conquered boardrooms face the harsh reality of prejudice in the skies? And what happens when a single moment of injustice ignites a movement that threatens to change the very soul of an industry? This isn't just a story about one slap. It's a journey through resilience, inner conflict, and the fight for dignity in spaces where many feel invisible. It's about the power to transform pain into lasting change, and how courage can rise even when the world tries to push you down. Are you ready to witness a story where strength meets grace, and justice isn't just demanded, it's redefined? If so, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe now, because this is a story you won't want to miss. It happened so fast, no one had time to react. The sound echoed through the cabin like a whip crack, startling even those wearing noise-canceling headphones. Passengers in first class turned in unison, mouths parted, eyes wide. A hush spread over the rows like fog settling over a quiet lake. Dr. Alana Brooks sat frozen, her left cheek stinging, her heart pounding. A small cut along her lip trickled blood, one bright red drop sliding down the deep brown of her skin. It landed silently on her pressed ivory blouse, staining it like a mark of something far deeper than pain. She didn't speak, didn't flinch, didn't retaliate. Instead, she reached into her sleek black tote, pulled out a folded handkerchief, and dabbed at the blood with a grace so still it unsettled the already shocked onlookers. Her face betrayed nothing. No fury, no fear, no collapse, only silence. Across from her, standing rigid with her hand still half raised in the air, was the woman who had struck her. Melissa Trent, the lead flight attendant on Polaris Air Flight 227, seemed to realize what she had done only after the contact. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Her eyes searched the faces around her, desperate for some ally, some thread of justification. There were none. Phones came out. The recording lights blinked on like a string of red fireflies. The entire first-class cabin was now an audience. There was no hiding, no denial. A man in seat 2C gasped audibly. She just hit her. He whispered to no one in particular. The air was thinner now, suffocating. The hum of the engines, the buzz of the air vents, everything seemed louder in contrast to the stunned silence. Alana still hadn't spoken. She looked up, not at Melissa, but straight ahead, as if the overhead bin somehow held the answer to a question too old, too familiar. Then she turned slowly, locked eyes with Melissa, and finally spoke, her voice even and quiet. "You've made a mistake," she said. It wasn't a threat, it was a truth wrapped in decades of injustice, a truth heavy with history, a truth Melissa couldn't understand, not yet. From row 6B, a man with sharp eyes and a discreet earpiece stood. Reese Dalton had been watching the situation unfold. He was a former military intelligence officer, now serving as Dr. Brooks' personal security advisor. Reese's movements were smooth, practiced. He didn't rush toward her or make a scene. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began making a call. His voice was low but firm. "Incident confirmed. Flight 297. Prepare protocol." 2 rows behind Alana. A young woman clutched her tablet to her chest and whispered to her seatmate, Is that who I think it is?" She wasn't sure, because the woman sitting in seat 2A, the one now bleeding, the one with more poise in her silence than most had in their power, wasn't flying on a private jet today. She had chosen to fly commercial, quietly, anonymously. There was no security entourage, no PR team, no headlines, just her, Dr. Alana Brooks, founder and CEO of Lumynex AI, worth north of $11.3 billion, one of the most powerful black women in the global tech industry, and as fate would have it, less than 18 hours away from finalizing her acquisition of Polaris Air, the airline whose employee had just struck her. But Melissa Trent didn't know that. She only saw a black woman seated in first class, and somehow that had been enough. 35,000 feet above ground. A single slap had opened a chasm. It wasn't just about disrespect. It wasn't just about bad service. It wasn't even just about race, though race was the root, the trunk, the sky. It was about the systems that allowed someone like Melissa to feel justified in her anger. About the corporate culture that tolerated microaggressions until they became macro. About the years of buried complaints, shrugged-off discrimination, and quiet warnings ignored by people too comfortable to care. Alana had faced worse. She had walked into boardrooms full of men who called her assistant before they realized she was their potential buyer. She had been followed in luxury boutiques where she could have purchased the entire store. She had delivered keynote addresses at global tech summits only to be asked afterward who had written the speech for her. But this was new. This was violence. Visible, audible, unmistakable. She glanced around the cabin. Some passengers looked away. Others held their phones but didn't know what to do with them. One woman was crying. A man 2 seats back was already on the phone, reporting what had happened. A teenage boy leaned into the aisle, expression unreadable, but his hand gripping the phone in his lap. Melissa still stood in place, a wordless ghost of authority, unraveling. Then, from the rear of the cabin, another flight attendant hurried forward, eyes darting from Alana to Melissa. "What's going on?" she asked, voice hushed. Alana didn't reply. She didn't have to. The red handprint on her cheek, the single line of blood, and the cameras pointed in every direction had already answered. The captain would be notified. The authorities would be waiting on the ground, and Polaris Air's world was about to change forever. Not because of a lawsuit, not because of a trending hashtag, but because the woman Melissa had just struck already owned them. They just didn't know it yet. As the silence stretched on and the clouds drifted by below, Alana folded the blood-stained handkerchief, placed it gently back into her bag, and closed her eyes. This story wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. 12 hours before the slap that would ricochet through headlines and boardrooms. Dr. Alana Brooks stood quietly in her Manhattan apartment, folding a soft navy sweater into a small carry-on. She didn't need much, just a change of clothes, a slim laptop, and the same leather-bound journal she had been writing in for years. Outside her window, the skyline buzzed with life. Below, the honks, heels, and chatter of the city carried upward in waves, but her penthouse remained still, a quiet sanctuary above the chaos. Alana moved slowly, deliberately. Her schedule had taught her the value of stillness, that in the endless push of running Lumynex AI, in the contracts and code, the late-night strategy calls and high-stakes negotiations. What she needed most what she rarely got was time to breathe. Today, she was flying to San Francisco, not on her Gulfstream, though it sat fueled and ready at Teterboro. Today, she would fly Polaris Air, first class, flight 227, quietly, anonymously, and for a reason very few people knew. Polaris Air was about to be hers. The acquisition had taken months of discreet maneuvering. Through a web of private equity and silent investment vehicles, Lumynex had secured a controlling interest in Polaris's parent company. Tomorrow morning, Alana would finalize the paperwork in a closed-door session with Polaris's executive board. By noon, she would control 67% of voting shares. She hadn't told the press, she hadn't made an announcement, she hadn't even told most of her senior leadership team, because before the ink dried, she wanted to see it for herself. She wanted to know what kind of airline she was inheriting, not from board reports or PR briefings, but from the tray tables and overhead bins, from the faces of flight attendants and the weight of how passengers were treated. So she booked the ticket herself. First class, of course. She had no intention of being performative. She was who she was. And if this airline's customer experience was different, dependent on skin color, social cues, or assumptions, she would feel it firsthand. She glanced at the mirror before leaving. A clean black turtleneck, tailored navy trousers, a soft trench coat, understated, comfortable, polished but not flashy. Her hair was coiled in a neat bun. No jewelry but a simple pair of pearl studs and a thin gold band on her right hand, the only thing she still wore from her mother's belongings. Alana touched the ring lightly before grabbing her bag. Reese Dalton was already waiting outside. He didn't wear the standard suit most private security preferred. Instead, he wore jeans and a gray jacket, blending in as her assistant or colleague. He didn't speak when she approached the car. He didn't need to. They'd worked together for nearly a decade. He opened the door, took her bag, and settled into the front seat without a word. Traffic to JFK was light, unusually so. As they crossed the bridge, Alana watched the gray water ripple below. Her thoughts drifted not to board meetings or negotiations, but to her mother. She would have been proud of this moment. No one had believed a girl from Newark with a used Dell laptop and a battered public school education would someday create one of the most advanced neural learning models in the world. No one, except for Alana Brooks. Her mother had worked 2 jobs and taken night classes for most of Alana's childhood. She had worn calloused hands and exhaustion like armor. But she'd never let her daughter settle for less. When Alana was 14 and coding her first algorithm on a borrowed school desktop, Darlene stood behind her, watching with quiet awe. "I don't know what you're building, baby," she'd said, "but I know it's bigger than this place, bigger than anything I've ever seen." That had been the moment. The one that lodged itself in Alana's chest and never left. Her phone buzzed in her lap, snapping her from the memory. A message from Devin Clark, her communications chief. All quiet on the West Coast. NDAs holding. No leaks. She responded with a thumbs up. The timing had to be perfect. She wasn't doing this for media attention. The acquisition of Polaris was more than expansion. It was personal. 2 years ago, she'd witnessed her godson, Jalen, then 13, get escorted off a flight by airline staff for looking suspicious. The only suspicious thing about Jalen was that he was tall for his age and black. No apology had ever come, only a half-hearted refund. Alana had made a promise then. Someday, She would own a seat at the table so large no one would ever dare pull a chair out from under another child again. Today was the beginning of that promise. At the airport, she declined the private lounge. Reese raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. She smiled slightly and walked to the terminal like any other first-class traveler. When they reached the gate, she paused, breathing in the sterile air, the hum of wheelie bags and overhead announcements. Then, she stepped forward. The gate agent scanned her ticket. First class, seat 2A. The agent glanced up briefly, said nothing. Alana noticed the flicker of uncertainty in her expression, but let it pass. As she stepped into the jet bridge, she exhaled slowly. The familiar scent of recirculated air and lemon-scented disinfectant filled her nose. The plane was quiet passengers still trickling in behind her. Then she saw her, Melissa Trent, flat lead, late 30s, hair in a tight bun, pale foundation not quite matching her neck, smile only half-formed. Melissa didn't greet her, didn't even ask if she needed help. She stepped forward slightly, blocking the aisle. "Ma'am, economy boarding is down the other ramp." Alana blinked once. "I'm in first class," she replied evenly, handing over her boarding pass. Melissa took it, squinting, holding it longer than necessary. Her eyes flicked over Alana again. Shoes, coat, skin. She handed the pass back without apology. Right side, seat 2A, no smile, no welcome. Alana moved past her silently. Reese, following behind at a discreet distance, watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. He didn't say anything, not yet. Alana took her seat, stowed her bag, and looked out the window. She had just stepped into the very system she was about to inherit, and it was already whispering back to her, "You don't belong here." But she did. She always had. And soon. She wouldn't just belong. She would be the one deciding who did. The hum of the cabin grew louder as more passengers boarded. Luggage thudded into overhead bins. Seatbelts clicked. Announcements buzzed from the speakers overhead, a monotone reminder of safety and time zones. But in seat 2A, Dr. Alana Brooks sat still, back straight, eyes on the window, ears tuned to every detail unfolding around her. She had no intention of letting anything pass unnoticed. Not today. Melissa Trent walked briskly up the aisle, clipboard in hand. Her posture was confident, almost rigid. She had worked this route for nearly 6 years, and she knew every creak of the cabin, every passenger profile by the look in their eyes. But something about today unsettled her. She could not name it, not yet. Maybe it was the woman in seat 2A. Something about her presence pulled focus, calm, dressed with care, unbothered yet hyper-aware. Melissa had clocked her immediately, the same way she had quietly clocked every passenger over the years. She prided herself on being observant, efficient, knowing what kind of customer she was dealing with before the first welcome aboard. But something about that woman's eyes had made her pause. And the boarding pass first class, Melissa pushed the thought aside. She had work to do, service to begin, performance to maintain. The in-flight director had warned them Polaris had received multiple internal evaluations in recent months. They did not know where or when it would hit. There was talk of a secret passenger flying incognito, a potential audit. Melissa doubted it was anyone in coach, but she had her suspicions about a man in seat 1C, Rolex, tan coat, a quiet arrogance. She glanced back at 2A again. The woman was now typing into a sleek tablet, face unreadable. Melissa turned and began service prep. 20 minutes later, drink service began. Melissa served rows 1 and 3 first, then returned to 2C, where a middle-aged white man in a suit asked for bourbon and began chatting about his real estate investments without waiting for permission. Alana was watching this from the corner of her eye. Her call button had been on for 4 minutes. No one had responded. She turned it off. She would not chase civility. Not here. Not again. It was something she had learned early in life, how to sit in a room that was not built for her and still breathe like she belonged. She had learned to fold discomfort into stillness. Not silent stillness. There was a difference. One was suppression. The other was strategy. Stillness was how she had survived Stanford. Stillness had helped her sit through venture capital meetings where they mistook her for the assistant. Stillness had kept her steady when a security guard once followed her through an entire tech conference, assuming her badge was fake. Today, her stillness would be her armor. But even armor has weight. Melissa eventually arrived. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked without eye contact. Pin already poised as if hoping for a quick response and exit. Alana looked up, her voice quiet. "Hot water with lemon, please." Melissa nodded and turned away. No confirmation, no smile. The man in 2C was now on his second bourbon. In row 6B, Reese Dalton continued observing. His eyes moved from the aisle to the window to his tablet and back. He did not intervene. Not yet. He had learned from Alana that not every injustice needed a sword. Sometimes, the scalpel worked better. He noticed the pattern already emerging. Service was selective. Engagement was strategic. Courtesy was conditional. It always was. 15 minutes passed before Melissa returned. She set the cup down without a word. The lemon was missing, the water lukewarm. Alana said nothing. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small lemon wedge she'd brought from home. She always traveled with her own, a quiet ritual, a soft rebellion. She dropped it into the cup, letting the steam kiss her face, eyes still on the world outside the window. Somewhere below, the clouds moved like memories. Back in the galley, Melissa muttered under her breath as she typed into her crew log. She had not expected such tension from this passenger. There was something about her composed, too quiet, and something in Melissa bristled against that quiet. Not arrogance, not attitude, but presence. The woman was not trying to prove anything, and that unnerved her more than she cared to admit. She had spent years dealing with difficult passengers, some demanding, some drunk, some rude. But this woman said nothing, did nothing. She simply existed. And somehow, that was the problem. 30 minutes into the flight, turbulence began to rattle the cabin. Nothing severe, just enough to jostle drinks and draw murmurs from the back. Melissa moved quickly to check tray tables. When she reached 2A, Alana was holding her cup gently, steadying it with both hands. "Please secure that," Melissa said abruptly, reaching to grab the cup. "I've got it," Alana replied, calm. But Melissa reached anyway. In the rush, her elbow bumped the tray, tipping the cup sideways. The hot water spilled across Alana's lap. She gasped softly and pulled back, the heat soaking through her trousers. Melissa recoiled. "You shouldn't have held it like that," she snapped. Alana looked up, eyes narrowing just slightly. "I said I had it," she answered, her voice like velvet and steel. Passengers nearby turned to watch. The man in 2C looked startled. Melissa straightened. "I don't appreciate the attitude," she said, louder now. I'm not giving attitude, Alana replied. I'm pointing out a lack of care. Reese had now stood halfway in the aisle, ready to approach. Alana held out one hand, a silent signal. Not yet. Melissa stared down at her, breathing hard. Her jaw tightened, and then she said something that made the cabin tilt. You people always think you're being targeted. Maybe if you didn't act like you're better than the rest of us, you wouldn't feel so. She didn't finish, because the man in 2C stood up. That's enough, he said sharply. The air crackled. Alana reached slowly into her bag and pulled out her phone. She pressed record. I'd like to document this interaction, she said calmly. Melissa's eyes went wide, and then she did something she would regret for the rest of her life. She raised her hand, and she slapped Dr. Alana Brooks across the face, a sharp, unyielding strike. The cabin fell into silence. Again, but this time, no one looked away. Phones came up. Recordings started. Truth had entered the cabin, and it was not leaving quietly. The sting from Melissa Trent's slap lingered long after the shockwave passed. Dr. Alana Brooks sat motionless in seat 2A. Her face turned slightly, the red imprint of Melissa's hand blooming across her cheek like an accusation. A line of blood curved downward from the corner of her lip. She didn't wipe it. Not yet. She didn't want to smudge the truth of what had just happened, because this moment would be remembered, not for the volume of the voices, but for the silence that followed. No one moved, no one breathed. It was as if the plane itself had frozen at 36,000 feet, suspended between altitude and accountability. Reese Dalton took a step into the aisle, not forceful, but steady. His hand hovered near his side, not touching the concealed device in his jacket, but close enough. His eyes locked on Alana's. He didn't need to ask if she was all right. He knew she was not, but he also knew her answer would be the same. I'm fine. It was her armor. The same armor she had worn when investors laughed her out of their offices in her 20s, when journalists asked if she was just the face behind Lumynex, when a board member once casually referred to her as articulate for someone like her. 1,000 paper cuts. This, though this was a blade. Alana finally blinked. She reached into her bag, took out a cloth handkerchief, and dabbed the blood from her lip. Then she folded it carefully and set it aside like an artifact, a part of history that would need no caption. The man in seat 2C leaned closer. Are you okay? He asked, voice trembling. Alana nodded once. Yes. Thank you for speaking up. I didn't do enough. You did more than most. Melissa Trent was shaking. Her mouth opened and closed without sound. She looked at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. Her lips parted. I didn't mean, ma'am, Reese said, his voice firm. Please step back. His tone was calm, but final. Melissa obeyed without protest, stepping backward toward the galley, where another flight attendant was already on her radio. The younger woman's face was pale. Her hand clutched the handle of the cart so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Melissa retreated behind the curtain. Alana leaned her head back. The pain on her cheek throbbed, warm and rhythmic. But it wasn't the pain that hurt. It was the familiarity, the predictability. She wasn't surprised. That was the worst part. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet voice had always prepared her for this. You can have degrees. You can build companies. You can outwork them all. But it might still come down to how they see you, or how they refuse to see you. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Baby, they'll try to shrink you to fit into their world. Don't let 'em." She hadn't. But today, someone had still tried to strike her into silence. 2 rows behind, a teenage boy with locks stared wide-eyed at Alana. His mother whispered to him to look away, but he couldn't. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen. She didn't cry, didn't shout, she just sat there. And somehow, she looked stronger than the person who had hit her. In seat 3B, a woman in a business suit wiped tears from her eyes, whispering, "I cannot believe I just saw that." Another passenger sent a text to their spouse. "Something awful just happened on this flight. I think it's going viral," and it was. Footage had already been uploaded. Within minutes, clips were being shared, retweeted, slowed down, captioned. Flight 227 was now a digital courtroom, and Alana, she was the face of its reckoning. Back in the cockpit, the captain had been notified. "We've had an incident," the co-pilot whispered into his headset. "Passenger was struck. The crew member is currently being restrained." The captain exhaled. "Notify ground. We'll need security and medical. This flight just changed." Alana checked her phone. No signal. No service. Of course not. They were still over the Rockies. The plane cruised forward like nothing had happened. Drinks were still being poured. Someone in economy still laughed at a movie. But in first class, the atmosphere was oxygen thin. Reese approached quietly. "Ma'am, do you want to move seats?" "No." "Are you sure I want her to see that I stayed?" Reese nodded. He understood. The younger flight attendant brought her a fresh cup of hot water, this time with lemon. Her hands trembled as she set it down. She couldn't meet Alana's eyes. "Thank you," Alana said softly. The woman blinked, surprised. "You're welcome." Then she turned and hurried back. In the galley, Melissa sat on the jump seat, head in her hands. She felt sick. Her mind reeled. What had she done? How had she let it go that far? It was supposed to be another routine flight. She had not come to work planning to hit someone, but she had felt something simmering inside from the moment she saw that woman step on board. She tried to tell herself it wasn't about race. She tried to believe that. But deep down, she knew it was. Not in words, not in conscious thought, but in the way she had dismissed her, in the tone, in the assumption, in the accumulation of quiet indignities she had learned to deliver with a smile over the years. This time, though, she had crossed the line, not just legally, but morally. 40 minutes passed. The plane descended gradually into California airspace. The intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be landing in San Francisco shortly. Please remain seated until we arrive at the gate." A strange calm settled over the cabin. In seat 2A, Alana took a deep breath. She opened her journal and began to write. Not for evidence, not for memory, but for clarity. She wrote down exactly what had happened. Then, on a fresh page, she wrote one sentence. "I have waited my whole life for the chance to decide what justice looks like." Then she closed the journal and looked forward. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. In the last row of the plane, a little black girl sat beside her father. She turned and looked at the woman in 2A. She didn't know who she was, but she saw the mark on her face and the way she still sat tall. "Daddy," the girl whispered. "She looks like a queen." Her father looked at Alana, then back at his daughter. "She is," he said. He didn't know how right he was. The wheels touched down with a soft thud. But inside the cabin of Polaris Air Flight 227, no one relaxed. There was no polite clapping for the pilot, no casual rustling of newspapers or stretching of limbs, just the kind of silence that follows something unforgettable, the kind that seeps into skin and memory. Dr. Alana Brooks sat upright, eyes fixed on the seat back ahead. Her hands were folded in her lap. She had not spoken since the slap, had not looked at her phone, had not cried. She simply waited. She could feel the blood drying against her skin where Melissa Trent had struck her. The hot water spill had soaked into the lining of her trousers earlier, still faintly damp. A symbolic echo of the icy contempt poured over her that day. Behind the curtain, Melissa paced. She had tried to radio the captain again, tried to explain herself to the co-lead, but no one had said much in return. The look on the younger attendant's face was enough. A look that said something irreversible had happened, and nothing Melissa said now would undo it. She stared at the clock above the galley sink. 7 minutes until the gate. 7 minutes until she would have to walk off that plane. 7 minutes until her name would become a hashtag or a cautionary tale or both. The cameras had been rolling. She had seen them. Her hands had shaken when she caught sight of the man in 3D uploading a video in real time. No one had stepped in to save her, because there was no defense for what she had done. And somehow, the worst part wasn't the strike. It was the silence after. The way that woman in 2A had looked at her without fear, without even anger, just with this piercing stillness that said more than words ever could. It told her she had failed, not just at her job, but at being decent. The plane taxied slowly toward gate 33B. Alana finally moved. She reached into her tote bag, pulled out her phone, and powered it back on. No alerts yet, but she knew they were coming. Within moments, her screen lit up. Messages flooded in. From her comms chief Devin Clark, from her legal counsel Jada Ellison, from Elliot Vance, the CEO of Polaris. She read the first few. Alana, call me. Emergency response already triggered. Need confirmation you're safe. Board is scrambling. Sit tight. We're moving assets into protection protocol. She glanced at Reese, who was already typing rapidly into his own phone 2 rows back. His jaw was tight, his posture unchanged. She could tell his team was already in place. Across the aisle, the man in 2C leaned closer. "Ma'am," he said gently. "I know you don't owe anyone anything, but if you ever need a witness, I'll speak." Alana gave him a small nod. "Thank you," she replied. "That means more than you know." As the plane pulled to a full stop, the intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived. Please remain seated while the aircraft is parked at the gate." A long pause. Then the voice continued. "There will be security personnel meeting us on arrival. Please follow crew instructions and remain calm. We appreciate your cooperation." Passengers shifted. Whispers spread like sparks on dry leaves. Alana remained still, the mark on her face, now darkening into a bruise, spoke louder than any announcement. Outside, 3 security officers waited near the jet bridge. With them stood a woman in a sharp navy suit, earpiece tucked discreetly behind her curls. That was Jada Ellison, Lumynex's general counsel. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes were fire. To her left stood Elliot Vance, CEO of Polaris Air. He wasn't supposed to be here, not publicly, not until tomorrow's secret meeting where he was to hand over full operational control of the airline to Alana Brooks. But when he had received the footage, when his assistant ran in, pale-faced and breathless, laptop in hand, whispering. You need to see this right now. He had canceled everything. Because the woman Melissa had slapped, she was the one buying his company. And now, the sky was falling. Back on the plane, Melissa clutched the galley counter, watching the jet bridge lock into place. Her throat was dry, her limbs tingled with panic. She imagined security walking up to her with handcuffs, cameras flashing, headlines screaming, family disowning. This couldn't be her ending. She peeked out of the curtain. Passengers were gathering bags, but no one dared crowd. No one dared pretend this was an ordinary landing. Reese stood now, helping Alana with her coat. She rose slowly. When she stepped into the aisle, her presence drew every eye. There were no gasps this time, just silence, reverence, gravity. She walked to the front of the plane, Reese trailing beside her like a shadow. Melissa stood frozen as Alana passed. She didn't look at her, not out of pride, but out of something deeper, a refusal to give Melissa a final piece of her dignity. Instead, she stepped off the plane, heels steady on the floor, into the brightness of the jet bridge, where Jada and Elliot stood waiting. The moment her shoes hit the carpet, Elliot stepped forward. "Dr. Brooks," he said. She turned to him, expression composed. "Mr. Vance, I'm so deeply sorry." She said nothing. He looked behind her. "Where is she?" "In the galley," Alana replied. "I didn't press charges, but she needs to be removed from service. Immediately." Jada was already nodding, phone in hand. "Already in motion," she said. "Union protocols allow for immediate suspension pending investigation." Alana paused. "Not just suspension." Elliot looked at her carefully. "I want her removed, but not discarded. I want to speak with her, personally." Jada's brows raised. Elliot blinked. "Are you sure he asked?" "I'm sure," Alana said. "I don't want her destroyed. I want her to understand." She glanced back at the jet door. "She doesn't even know who I am." Elliot swallowed. "She will." They walked down the terminal in silence. Cameras had not yet arrived, but the video was already trending. Passenger slapped on flat black woman, assaulted mid-air Polaris Air under fire. After racial incident, Alana's team had already sent out a holding statement. She would not speak to media. Not yet, not until she was ready. She turned to Jada. "Gather the board. Tonight. Emergency session." Jada nodded. "I'll make it happen." Alana looked down at her phone. Her reflection stared back at her in the black screen. Bruised, bloodied, but not broken. She opened her calendar app. Tomorrow morning was still blocked. Final acquisition of Polaris Air. She tapped it once, changed the label. Now it read, "First meeting with my airline." Back on the plane. Melissa sat alone in the jump seat. The other crew avoided her gaze. She could hear the whispers outside, the faint sound of footsteps retreating down the terminal. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe, but all she could see was the woman in 2A. All she could feel was her own hand, raised in rage, and all she could think was a question that would haunt her. What happens when you hurt someone who has the power to change everything? The boardroom on the 44th floor of the Polaris Air headquarters in San Francisco was not built for discomfort. It was all sleek lines and glass walls, filled with the scent of polished oak and expensive stillness. Outside the windows, the skyline shimmered in the golden light of early evening. But inside, tension hung in the air like fog. 12 executives sat around a long table, dressed in tailored suits and carefully curated expressions. At the head of the table, Elliot Vance stood, nervously shifting the weight between his feet. He checked the time again. 7:02. They were late. The room was abuzz with murmurs. Some board members had seen the video. Others had only heard secondhand. But all of them knew that today's meeting, once meant to be ceremonial, had become something else entirely. An emergency, a reckoning, then, without fanfare, the glass door slid open. Dr. Alana Brooks entered the room. She wore a dark navy pantsuit, understated and precise. The bruise on her cheek had begun to fade into a dull purple, but she had made no attempt to cover it. She wanted them to see it, to feel it, to confront what it meant. Reese Dalton followed 2 steps behind her, tablet in hand. Jada Ellison was already seated to her right, a binder open in front of her, filled with legal documents that no one in the room had dared to touch yet. Elliot stepped forward quickly. "Dr. Brooks," he said, voice low, deferential. "Mr. Vance," she replied evenly. He gestured toward the seat at the head of the table. "Please." Alana sat down. Everyone else followed. Silence. Then she spoke. "I assume you've all seen the footage by now." Several heads nodded. One man cleared his throat and said, We deeply regret what happened. Dr. Brooks, we're launching an internal review. The employee has been suspended. She's not the only issue." Alana interrupted. "Let's not pretend Melissa Trent is an anomaly. She's a symptom. And I didn't come here today to treat symptoms." The man fell silent. Alana looked down the table. Each person met her gaze, some nervous, some defensive, others simply curious. "Let me be clear," she said. "The acquisition of Polaris Air was never just about expansion. It was about transformation. I didn't buy this company to grow its market share. I bought it to reshape its culture." She paused. "And that begins tonight." Someone down the table shifted uncomfortably. A woman in a cream blazer raised her hand slightly. "With respect, Dr. Brooks, culture takes time. We can't just force a new narrative overnight." "You're right," Alana replied, "but we can stop lying to ourselves immediately." A murmur passed through the room. Jada slid a stack of printed reports across the table. "We've been conducting quiet audits of Polaris's internal operations for the past 4 months. What we found was consistent. Disproportionate complaints from passengers of color, hiring disparities across senior flight crew, a complaint resolution process that quietly deprioritized racial bias reports." Another board member frowned. "Why weren't we informed of this earlier?" "Because you weren't listening earlier," Alana said gently. "And because I needed to see it for myself." She leaned forward, hands folded. "Let me tell you what I saw. I saw a flight attendant look me in the eye and decide I didn't belong in first class. I saw her escalate over nothing. I saw her raise her hand, and I saw her realize, too late, who I was." Another silence. "But that moment doesn't scare me," Alana continued. "What scares me is how easily it could have been someone else, someone without my resources, my platform, my protections. What would have happened then? What happens on these flights every day when the cameras aren't rolling?" No one answered, so she did. "Nothing. Nothing happens. And that's the problem." Elliot Vance leaned forward, his voice tentative. "What are you proposing?" Exactly, Alana met his gaze. A full systems reset. She stood and tapped the touchpad on the screen behind her. A presentation flickered to life, effective immediately. "Polaris Air will launch a 3-tier internal reform program. It's called Project Elevate. The screen shifted to show 3 pillars: dignity, accountability, transformation. Tier 1, she said. We overhaul training, not performative workshops. I'm talking about immersive simulations, neurobehavioral coaching, implicit bias rewiring. Flight crews will be taught more than safety. They will be taught humanity. She moved to the second pillar, Tier 2, transparent accountability. Every in-flight interaction flagged by a complaint or an escalation will be subject to review by an independent ethics committee. Not PR, not HR, a real committee with oversight. The third pillar filled the screen, Tier 3, the Second Sky Initiative. We will recruit and train underrepresented youth from marginalized communities for careers in aviation. Pilots, engineers, flight directors. It won't just be a scholarship program, it'll be a leadership pipeline. The room was dead quiet. I'm not here to repair a plane. She finished. I'm here to rebuild the sky. There was a long pause. Then Elliot stood. I support this, he said, fully. Several board members followed. A few looked unsure. Alana turned to them. If you're uncomfortable, good. Change should feel uncomfortable, but make no mistake. This is the direction we're flying. Either help steer or step off the plane. The meeting ended 2 hours later, outside. The city had grown dark. Street lights shimmered off glass towers. Alana stood at the window alone for a moment, staring down at the runway lights blinking faintly in the distance. Jada walked up beside her. Never seen a boardroom go that quiet, she said. Alana gave a small smile. Sometimes you don't need to shout. You just need to show them what the truth looks like. Jada hesitated, and Melissa Alana didn't answer right away. Then she spoke, voice softer now. I want to talk to her later that night in a private conference room on a lower floor. Melissa Trent waited. She had been escorted here hours earlier by security. Not arrested, not fired, just told to wait. The minutes stretched, her heart raced, her palms sweat. Then the door opened. Alana entered alone. Melissa stood quickly. Dr. Brooks, I didn't know. I never would have Alana held up a hand. I'm not here to hear excuses. Melissa swallowed hard. I'm sorry, she whispered. Alana sat across from her. I know, she said, but being sorry isn't the end. It's the beginning. Melissa looked confused. Alana leaned in. I want to offer you something, not a job, not a pass, an invitation. Melissa blinked. To what Alana smiled faintly, to grow, to help fix what you broke, and to become someone who never forgets what it means to see another person fully. Melissa's eyes welled with tears, and for the first time in hours, she felt something shift. Maybe she would never fly again, but maybe, just maybe, she could still learn to soar. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Billionaire passenger slapped mid-flight. Polaris CEO-elect speaks out on racism in the skies. From victim to visionary doctor, Alana Brooks sets new standard for airlines. Alana sat alone in her apartment, still in her sleepwear, cradling a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The bruising on her cheek had begun to turn a soft yellow near the edges. Reese had offered to bring in a doctor, but she declined. She didn't want to erase it just yet. Some bruises were reminders. Some were blueprints. The city below was already buzzing. Traffic honked. Drones zipped by skyscraper balconies delivering packages. But inside her apartment, everything was quiet. Too quiet. She opened her laptop and read through the draft statement from her communications team. It was polished, precise, sincere. But it didn't feel like her voice. Not the voice of a woman who had been told to her face she didn't belong in first class. Not the voice of a girl from East Atlanta who used to walk past private terminals and wonder if people like her were ever meant to walk through those doors. She opened a blank document. She started to type. I wasn't slapped because I was in first class. I was slapped because someone decided I couldn't be. She paused, deleted it, then typed again. This isn't just about me. This is about how systems protect silence, how dignity becomes negotiable at 30,000 feet, how every seat on a plane should come with basic human respect. She kept going. The statement wasn't for the press anymore. It was for every person who had ever been made small while doing everything right, at that very moment, across town, in a modest two-bedroom apartment with outdated tiles and a flickering hallway light. Melissa Trent sat on her couch, surrounded by silence. Her phone had not stopped buzzing for 2 days. Family, friends, strangers, journalists, some calling to condemn, others to demand answers, a few just to scream. She hadn't picked up a single call. On the TV. The clip played again, her hand raised, her face twisted in frustration. The slap heard around the world. Her parents had called last night. They didn't yell. They didn't excuse her either. Her mother had simply said, Melissa, I don't recognize who you were on that plane. And the truth was, neither did she. Melissa was not proud of who she had become in those 5 minutes, but 5 minutes didn't appear out of nowhere. They were made up of years of silent prejudices she had let grow unchecked, years of small biases unspoken, years of assuming professionalism meant control, and control meant power. She had wielded power that day, and she had used it to wound. She looked at her reflection in the blank screen of her phone. The face that looked back was tired, bare, stripped of position, rank, and self-assurance. And yet, beneath the shame was the flicker of something else. Maybe redemption wasn't about erasing what she had done. Maybe it was about what she chose to do next. Back at Polaris headquarters, the Second Sky initiative had already started to take shape. Alana sat in a glass-walled meeting room with Reese and Jada, reviewing applications for the advisory council. They had received over 600 in less than 24 hours. Among them were educators, former flight attendants, DEI consultants, civil rights lawyers, and even a few pilots. Reese scrolled through a list of names. There's someone from Baton Rouge who runs a nonprofit teaching underserved girls how to fly drones. She's pivoting into aviation and wants to help design our training modules. Alana nodded. Bring her in. I want practical voices, not just academics. Jada glanced up from her legal notes. And what about Melissa? You asked to keep her involved. Do you still mean that Alana didn't answer immediately? She turned to the window, watching a plane lift into the sky across the bay. Let me talk to her again. She said, alone. That afternoon. Alana walked into a small Polaris coaching suite, one of the quiet conference rooms designed for employee reviews and development sessions. Melissa was already there, standing stiffly in front of the window. She looked like she hadn't slept. She turned when Alana entered. You came, Melissa said, voice cracking. Alana nodded. I said I would. They sat across from one another. Melissa began. "I've watched that video more times than I want to admit. I've read the articles, I've read the comments, some of them defending me, most of them rightfully furious. I don't blame them." She took a deep breath. "But I realized something last night. I don't want to disappear. I don't want to be a cautionary tale either. I want to understand what made me act that way. And I want to make sure I never do again. I'm not asking for a job. I'm asking for a chance to be useful." Alana studied her. "You're not the only one who has a choice to make." Melissa looked confused. Alana leaned forward slightly. "You can keep trying to scrub this from your record, or you can wear it as proof that you grew from it. If you want to work with me, you won't be giving lectures. You'll be listening. You'll be on the ground, sitting in rooms with people you've never seen as equals. You'll hear their stories, and they will hear yours." Melissa hesitated. "Do you think they'll ever trust me?" "That's not the question," Alana said quietly. "The question is whether you'll trust yourself to show up anyway." That evening, Alana returned home exhausted. She poured herself a glass of water, sat by the window, and watched the lights of a plane blink in the sky. She thought of her mother. She thought of every closed door she had ever faced. And now, here she was, owning the entire hallway. Still, her chest ached, not from the slap, but from everything it stirred up, the doubt, the fatigue, the weight of being the symbol when all she ever wanted was to just be. She opened her journal and wrote, "I didn't ask to carry this much, but maybe I was built to hold it." Then she closed the book and let the silence take over, a silence she had finally earned. 3 weeks later, Polaris Flight 904 was preparing for takeoff from Chicago O'Hare. It was a routine evening departure to Los Angeles. Gate agents moved quickly, families corralled their kids, business travelers tapped on laptops. First class had already begun boarding. In row 14C, near the wing, a woman named Mabel James settled into her seat with a quiet exhale. She was in her 60s, dressed in a cardigan and simple slacks, holding a worn leather purse in her lap. Her gray curls were neatly pulled back, and she wore the tired dignity of someone who had worked too many hours and raised too many kids without ever asking for recognition. Her boarding pass had been reassigned at the last minute. A gate attendant apologized and explained something vague about weight distribution. She hadn't complained. She never did. But as she looked out the window, something about the rows ahead tugged at her. Maybe it was the memory. 35 years ago, she had worked the overnight shift at a textile mill while raising 3 kids. One of them, a bright-eyed daughter named Alana, had once asked, "Mama, why don't we ever fly anywhere?" Mabel had smiled and said, "Because I'd rather teach you how to fly your own way, baby." She hadn't expected those words to come true. In first class, Dr. Alana Brooks sat quietly in seat 2A again. It had become her unofficial seat, not out of habit, out of purpose. The same seat where she was struck weeks before. She claimed it now as a symbol, not of revenge, but of presence. She wore a soft charcoal blouse, comfortable slacks, no jewelry beyond her wedding band and a thin silver bracelet with her daughter's initials engraved inside. The press had died down. Mostly, public memory was short, but impact was longer. Polaris had already begun implementing Project Elevate. The Second Sky initiative had opened 3 regional hubs in underprivileged communities. She was overseeing it all while still running Lumynex. Every morning started at 4:30 a.m. Every night ended with her daughter's bedtime story over video call. But today's flight was different, because today she wasn't traveling alone. The seat beside her was empty for now, but a few rows back, Melissa Trent stood near the rear galley, her hands fidgeting at her sides. This wasn't her old uniform. She wasn't flying as a crew member. She wasn't reinstated, not officially. She had been invited on board by Alana, not as a passenger, not as staff, as a student. Her presence on this flight was part of her restorative process, a new model Alana had designed in partnership with ethics scholars and community leaders. Rather than cancel offenders, she wanted to engage them, to challenge them to listen, reflect, grow. So here Melissa stood, wearing business casual slacks and a blouse, with a small badge that read Observer, Training, and Accountability. Passengers gave her curious glances. Some whispered. She knew she had a long way to go, but she was here, not to be forgiven, to earn trust again. As the flight continued boarding, a tall man in his early 20s passed Melissa in the aisle. He wore headphones and a hoodie, his skin a rich cocoa brown. He slowed near row 14, hesitated, then looked at Melissa. He didn't say a word, but his eyes narrowed slightly. She offered a polite nod. He gave a curt one back and kept walking. Melissa swallowed. Even now, she could feel the doubt in every glance. Some people would always see her as the villain in that video. She had accepted that, but this wasn't about repairing her reputation. It was about proving to herself that she could face what she had done and do something better in its place. A flight attendant announced final boarding. The last passengers hurried on, and the doors sealed shut with a hydraulic sigh. Engines hummed. Cabin lights dimmed slightly. Alana gazed out the window as the plane pushed back from the gate. Beside her, the empty seat was suddenly filled. A familiar voice. Thought I'd never make it. She turned, smiling as her mother, Mabel James, sat down beside her. Alana leaned over and kissed her cheek. You look good, Mama. You look tired, Mabel replied, teasing gently. They laughed. Polaris called and upgraded me without asking, Mabel said, settling in. I had no idea this was your flight. They didn't do it by accident, Alana said. Mabel raised an eyebrow. You have that much power now. Alana looked ahead. No, I just have the right people watching out for the ones who watched out for me. Midway through the flight, Melissa stood near the galley, holding a small tablet and reviewing a worksheet. She was instructed to observe specific interactions between flight crew and passengers, especially when tensions rose. She was to take notes, record language, pay attention to tone, but she found her attention drifting to seat 2A. She watched as Alana gently adjusted her mother's blanket, watched the two women lean in close to speak over soft laughter. It stirred something in her, an ache, not jealousy, regret. What kind of woman raises another who responds to hate with dignity? She had to know. When the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Mabel reached over and touched her daughter's hand. I'm proud of you, she said. I haven't even done half of what I want to do yet, Alana replied. I'm not proud of what you've done, Mabel said, squeezing her hand. I'm proud of who you stayed. The wheels touched down, and the plane rolled to the gate. Passengers stood to gather bags. Polite chatter filled the aisles again. Melissa waited at the galley, hands clasped. As Alana and her mother made their way forward, Melissa stepped out slightly. Mrs. James, she said quietly. May I say something? Mabel turned. Melissa looked nervous, not scripted. Real. I wanted to say thank you for raising someone like her. I know it's not my place, but Mabel smiled warmly. Child, she said, you can tell a lot about someone by how they handle being wrong. The fact that you're here tells me maybe you're learning. Melissa lowered her eyes. Trying every day, ma'am. Mabel gave a single nod. Keep doing that. Then she walked off the plane with her daughter, leaving Melissa standing there, holding that single nod like a lantern in the dark. Outside the terminal, the night air smelled of jet fuel and jasmine. Limousines waited. So did news vans, though security had kept them back. Reese approached with a quiet nod, then opened the door to the waiting car. Alana and Mabel stepped inside. As the door shut behind them, Mabel reached into her purse and pulled out something small, a folded paper. She handed it to Alana. What's this A note? Her mother said. From the day you left for college, I found it again yesterday. Alana unfolded the paper. It read, Don't fly to get away, fly to become. She stared at it, eyes misting. Her mother took her hand again. And you became baby. You really did. The soft hum of engines faded into silence as Dr. Alana Brooks stepped into the private Polaris training facility 2 days later. The space had once been used for standard flight simulations, emergency landings, mechanical failures, evacuation drills. But now it had been redesigned for something far more human. The room smelled of freshly cleaned carpet and coffee. There were chairs arranged in a circle, not rows, a large whiteboard with no writing, no branding, no podium, just openness. She stood at the doorway, watching quietly as the room filled. Flight attendants, gate agents, baggage handlers, mid-level managers, a few passengers from community outreach, and, seated alone near the back, Melissa Trent. This wasn't a mandatory workshop. Everyone here had volunteered. Alana walked to the center, wearing a simple gray turtleneck and jeans, hair pulled back. She looked more like a teacher than a CEO, and that was intentional. She looked around at the group. I'm not here today as a leader, she began. I'm here as a witness, and I hope you're here as one, too. The room grew still. I've spent my entire life trying to be invisible in first class. The quiet smile, the careful posture, the neutral tone, not too loud, not too proud, just enough to pass. And still, it wasn't enough, because sometimes someone's mind is already made up before you speak a word. A few attendants shifted in their seats. I was struck not because I misbehaved, but because I was misjudged. She paused, but the slap isn't what haunts me. Her voice softened. It's how easily it could have happened to someone else, and no one would have known. No cameras, no headlines, no apologies. She let that sit. I want to use that pain, not to punish, to rebuild, afterward. They broke into smaller circles. Alana didn't lead any of them. She joined the back group quietly, sitting across from Melissa, who looked like she hadn't quite exhaled since the day she boarded that flight. The facilitator, a middle-aged Latina named Rosa, guided them gently. This is not a space for defense. It's a space for reflection, for sitting with discomfort, for listening, not replying. A woman beside Melissa spoke first. I've worked this job 16 years, she said. I've seen passengers throw things, curse, threaten, but the people I've feared the least were always the ones that looked like Dr. Brooks. And yet, they were the ones most often treated like they didn't belong. Melissa nodded slowly. Her voice was tentative. I didn't realize how many stories I'd internalized. That anger equals threat. That silence means guilt. That black women in first class must be someone's guest, not the one paying. She looked at Alana. I carried that belief so deep, I didn't even question it until I watched myself on camera. Alana met her gaze, not with softness, but with clarity. That moment didn't begin on that flight. She said, "It began years before, and it doesn't end with me. It ends when we stop handing these narratives to each other like inheritance." Melissa nodded. And then she cried, not from shame, from release. Later that afternoon, Alana sat alone in her office overlooking the tarmac. The sun cast golden light across the wing of a nearby plane. Reese knocked once and entered, holding a file. "Passenger claims review data from last quarter." He said, "You might want to see this." She took the file and opened it. Pages of numbers, charts, pie graphs, then a table passenger complaints involving racial bias. Down 27%, resolution time, cut in half, employee referrals for restorative training, up 41%. She exhaled. "It's working," she said quietly. Slowly, Reese replied, "But yes, it is." Alana leaned back in her chair. "I've been thinking about the word turbulence," she said, "how it's really just pockets of unsteady air, invisible to the eye but powerful enough to shake an entire plane." Reese raised an eyebrow, and she smiled faintly. "I think we've finally learned how to fly through it." That evening, Alana video-called her daughter, Ava. The little girl appeared on the screen in a sparkly unicorn hoodie, half her hair in a lopsided ponytail. "Hi, Mommy," she shouted. Alana smiled, eyes warming instantly. "Hey, superstar. How was school? We had a guest pilot visit. She was a lady like you, and she showed us how planes fly upside down." Alana laughed. "I promise not to do that on your next flight." Ava giggled. "Guess what else? What I told my friend Luna, that you're fixing airplanes and fixing people." And she said, "Whoa, your mom is like a sky doctor." Alana's heart melted. "I like that. A sky doctor." Ava nodded. "You're going to fix all the skies, right?" Mommy Alana paused, then said, "I'm sure going to try." As the call ended, Alana sat quietly, staring at the frozen image of Ava's smile on the screen. She felt something settle in her chest, not heaviness, something else, like purpose finding its landing gear. She turned to her notebook and began to write, not for work, for herself. Notes for a speech she'd deliver soon, not to investors, to every employee, every crew member, every passenger who would sit in seat 2A from this day forward. She wrote, "We don't need bigger planes. We need braver skies. And brave begins with listening." Across the city, Melissa walked home in the early twilight. Her phone buzzed, but she didn't check it. She was thinking about something Alana said during the session. That silence can be a sentence. Melissa didn't want to be silent anymore. She wanted to speak, not in press releases, in actions, at home. She sat at her small kitchen table and opened her laptop. She created a new folder and titled it The Work. Inside, she began outlining a program. Flight Path Forward, a workshop for flight crews designed by former flight attendants who had made mistakes, learned, and changed. Real voices, real consequences, real growth. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew she couldn't stay in the past, and that maybe, just maybe the future had a seat for her. It was just past midnight when Flight 728 began its final approach into Boston. The sky outside was clear, the city glowing below like a constellation pinned to Earth. The in-flight lights had been dimmed. Most passengers were asleep. A soft murmur of engines and distant snoring filled the air. In seat 2A, Dr. Alana Brooks sat quietly, notebook open in her lap. She wasn't writing, just watching the inked words from an earlier meeting blur slightly in the low light. Across the aisle, a young black man in his early 20s glanced her way. She gave a small nod. He hesitated, then nodded back. For weeks now, she had become a recognizable presence in the skies, not just to crew members but passengers too. Not because of fame, but because the story had taken root in something deeper than headlines, something personal, something shared. It wasn't about being slapped anymore. It was about being seen. The pilot's voice crackled over the speaker. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Alana closed her notebook and fastened her seatbelt. A quiet, knowing breath escaped her lips. Then, from 2 rows behind, a voice cut through the stillness. She shouldn't even be up there. The words weren't shouted. They didn't have to be. They were loud enough for Alana to hear, and intentional. Another voice answered. "What do you mean?" The first voice, a man's, said, first class is supposed to be for paying passengers, not people looking for a handout or trying to make a statement." The second voice didn't respond. The cabin remained still, but Alana felt every heartbeat tighten. She could have turned, confronted, called the purser. Instead, she sat still, let the weight of it sit. She knew what silence cost, but she also knew the difference between silence and stillness. And right now, her stillness was saying more than anger ever could. When the plane landed, Alana waited for most passengers to deplane before standing. She walked slowly, feeling the edge of exhaustion creep into her spine. As she stepped into the jet bridge, she heard footsteps behind her. Dr. Brooks. She turned. It was the young black man from across the aisle. I wanted to say thank you for staying calm, for being there." Alana gave a faint smile. "Thank you for noticing." He hesitated. "My mom works at an airline. She's been following your story. She said you made her feel like she wasn't invisible anymore." Alana's throat tightened. "Tell her thank you, and tell her I see her, too." He nodded and disappeared into the terminal. Later that morning, Alana sat in a small Boston cafe, steaming coffee in her hands. It was a rare moment of solitude. Outside, the city moved like clockwork. Inside, she sat at a window seat, letting the sun warm her face. Jada Ellison arrived moments later, laptop tucked under her arm. "Long night?" she asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "Long everything," Alana replied with a smile. Jada opened her laptop. "There's something you should see." She turned the screen. It was a live stream, a town hall being held in Atlanta, one of the first community listening forums Polaris had sponsored under the new initiative. On stage, wearing a simple gray blouse and jeans, was Melissa Trent. She looked nervous, vulnerable, but she was speaking. "I'm not here today to be forgiven," Melissa said into the mic. "I'm here to be accountable. I've seen myself through the lens of that moment, and it hurt. But I've also seen what happens when we choose to listen after the damage is done." She paused. "I want to help others unlearn what I did, because we don't fix racism with apologies. We fix it with action, repetition, and humility." The crowd remained quiet, but the energy was palpable. Alana blinked slowly. She hadn't known Melissa would be speaking today. She looked at Jada. "She's doing the work," Jada said softly. Yes, Alana replied. She is. Back at Polaris headquarters 2 days later. The air was different. It wasn't just policy change anymore. It was culture shift. New posters in the hallway didn't show smiling flight attendants holding champagne. They showed words like, dignity is a seat that can't be downgraded and respect doesn't need. Clearance to board Alana passed by them as she made her way to a staff roundtable meeting. It was something she had implemented recently unscripted, open discussions with rotating teams from different departments. In the conference room, 12 people waited, engineers, cleaning crew, flight ops, even someone from the maintenance hangar. As Alana sat down, she noticed a young woman with a notepad who kept looking at her, hesitant. Alana gestured gently. Please, the woman spoke softly. My name is Clarissa. I've worked here 6 years, first as baggage, then cabin prep. When I saw what happened to you, I felt like I'd seen pieces of it before, but I'd always convinced myself to look away, to stay quiet. She swallowed. But when I saw you not stay quiet, it made me want to speak too. So thank you for making space. Alana nodded. Thank you for stepping into it. Another hand raised, a mechanic, then another, a pilot. It wasn't a room of perfect people. It was a room of honest ones, and sometimes that was enough to start. That evening, Alana walked the tarmac alone. The wind was brisk, sweeping across the concrete like memory. She approached the nose of a Polaris 757 and placed her hand against the cool aluminum. So much of her life had been spent chasing altitudes. High school valedictorian, MIT, her first tech acquisition at 29, Forbes covers, speeches, but it wasn't the altitude that had defined her. It was the turbulence, and how she had chosen to respond to it. She stood there for several minutes before whispering aloud. I belong here. The engines nearby rumbled in quiet agreement. Back in her office, she opened her personal folder and scrolled to the letter she had started weeks ago, the one she hadn't finished. It had begun as a statement, but now it was something more. It read, to anyone who has ever been questioned for belonging, to those who've been told they're in the wrong seat, to those who've had to shrink so others feel big. I see you, and we are rewriting what belongs looks like together. She clicked save, then she added one final line. This plane doesn't rise without all of us. The morning fog at San Francisco International hung low and quiet like a secret not yet spoken. It rolled across the runway in ribbons, muting the sound of early aircraft departures and making even the loudest engines feel distant. Doctor. Alana Brooks stepped onto Polaris Flight 901 a short hop to Seattle. The plane was half full, no press, no camera crews, no entourage, just her, a tote bag, and a copy of Maya Angelou's Letters to My Daughter. She hadn't planned to fly today, but something had drawn her to the sky again. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was the need to sit in seat 2A one final time before things changed again. Because today wasn't just another flight. It was her last as a passenger before the full acquisition became official. By midnight, Polaris Airlines would be under Lumynex Aviation Holdings. Everything would be hers. And yet, in this moment, Alana didn't feel like an owner. She felt like a woman who had survived something deep and invisible, a storm only a few truly understood. A reckoning that started in silence but reshaped the air around her. As she buckled her seatbelt, she glanced around. The flight attendant in charge today was a young man named Elijah. She remembered seeing him in one of the training sessions. His eyes were gentle, his demeanor alert but soft. He recognized her, but didn't rush to speak. Instead, he offered a respectful nod and asked if she wanted tea before takeoff. "Green with lemon, if you have it," she said. "Of course, Dr. Brooks." Then he walked away. No fuss, no performative gestures, just kindness. She smiled. That alone meant things were already changing. At the back of the plane, seated quietly by the window in row 22, Melissa Trent exhaled deeply. This flight had been part of her agreement with Polaris's new accountability pilot program. She was not a crew member today, just a participant, a learner, an observer, and for the first time in a long while, she felt ready. Not ready to be forgiven. Ready to keep showing up anyway. The past few weeks had reshaped her life, speaking in forums, listening to communities, co-founding a new peer education series alongside Alana's DEI team, and, most difficult of all, recording a message that would soon be played during Polaris crew onboarding sessions. In the video, she didn't use scripts. She simply looked into the camera and said, "I got it wrong. I didn't just harm a woman. I upheld a story about who belongs, and that story was wrong. I'm here now to help rewrite it." It had taken 3 tries to get through the recording without breaking down, but she did it, and she meant every word. In the cabin, passengers settled into their seats. A mother with 2 small kids across the aisle from Alana gave her an apologetic smile as her toddler kicked the tray table. Alana smiled back and leaned slightly toward the boy. "What's your name, Micah?" he said shyly. "That's a powerful name." She replied, "Did you know Micah means who is like God?" The mother looked surprised. "I didn't know that," she said. "We just like the sound." "Well," Alana said, "now you know you chose something strong." The child grinned, and the kicking stopped. As the plane taxied down the runway, the intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Polaris Flight 901 to Seattle. Your safety is our priority. Please take a moment to listen as we demonstrate the safety features of this aircraft." Alana let the familiar cadence wash over her. It had always been a ritual. The same announcements, the same buckling gestures, the same pointed finger at the exits. But this time, something felt different. Elijah's voice came over the speaker next. "We're also proud to remind you that Polaris is undergoing transformation. This flight is part of a new Chapter 1 where everyone is welcome. Dignity is standard, and humanity comes first." Alana felt her chest tighten, not with fear, with recognition. Her story had made it into policy, into practice, into voice, 30 minutes into the flight. Alana stood and walked down the aisle, stretching her legs. When she reached row 22, Melissa looked up. Their eyes met. Alana motioned toward the empty aisle seat beside her. "May I?" Melissa nodded silently. They sat for a moment, neither speaking. Then Melissa broke the quiet. "Do you remember what I said to you?" Right after it happened, Alana looked at her. "You said, 'I didn't mean to.'" Melissa nodded. "I thought about that sentence 100 times, and what I should have said instead was, 'I was wrong. I was blind to myself, to the air I carried, and I don't expect this to undo it.'" Alana listened, then said softly, "You're doing the work. Not everyone would." Melissa's hands fidgeted in her lap. "I used to think being right was the most important thing, but now I think maybe being willing to learn is braver." Alana nodded, and quieter. Melissa looked at her, curious. Quieter. Alana smiled. Yes, quiet like a course correction, like an apology whispered instead of announced, like healing that doesn't need an audience. Melissa exhaled. Thank you for not letting me fall through the cracks. Alana stood gently. No one rises alone. Then she returned to her seat. As the plane began its descent, clouds parted to reveal the snow-capped peaks outside Seattle. Alana looked down at them, awe rising in her chest. It was still magic. Even now, even after all of it, the act of flying still moved her, not because of height, because of how fragile it was and how we still did it anyway. When the wheels touched down, the passengers applauded, but Alana didn't. She simply placed her hand over her heart and closed her eyes. A quiet gesture, but full of meaning. Back in the terminal, Alana stood for a moment just outside the gate. The terminal buzzed with life. Businessmen hurried with briefcases. A group of teens laughed near a vending machine. An older man in a Vietnam cap read a paperback. Life, in all its variation, surged around her, and it filled her with a strange kind of peace. Melissa approached slowly from behind. They didn't speak, they just nodded. Two people changed by turbulence, by choice, by grace, and by a single seat in first class that had become something more. Not a throne, not a spotlight, just a mirror, one that reflected who we really are and who we still might become. The conference room at Polaris headquarters buzzed with quiet anticipation. Today was no ordinary meeting. It was the unveiling of the Second Sky Initiative's full rollout, a program born from pain, growth, and resilience. Dr. Alana Brooks stood at the front, facing a diverse crowd of employees, community leaders, and press. Her gray blouse caught the light softly as she cleared her throat and began, "This initiative is more than a policy. It is a promise that Polaris will not only provide safe flights, but safe spaces. Spaces where every passenger and employee is treated with dignity, regardless of who they are or where they come from." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Some were skeptical, many hopeful, all deeply attentive. We started with an incident that shook us, an incident that exposed what many have long known but few have faced publicly. Her voice softened, almost a whisper. But from that moment came an opportunity to transform, to rebuild trust, to rise above what divided us and build something new. A round of applause rippled through the room, genuine and warm. Backstage, Melissa Trent watched with tears shimmering in her eyes. Months ago, she could not have imagined standing here part of the story rather than its antagonist. She thought about the journey, the shame, the doubt, the work, but most of all, she thought about the faces of those she had wronged and the chance she had been given to make amends. A hand on her shoulder made her look up. It was Alana. "Ready?" Alana asked, her smile steady and kind. Melissa nodded. Together, they stepped forward to join the panel discussion that would follow the speech. The months since the infamous flight had been intense. Polaris Airlines underwent a remarkable transformation under Lumynex Aviation's stewardship. Diversity and inclusion were no longer optional checkboxes, but pillars embedded into every aspect of the company. Hiring practices were overhauled to ensure equitable opportunities. Leadership programs were launched to cultivate talent from marginalized communities. Customer complaint protocols became transparent and swift, with independent oversight. The Accountability Pilot Program, originally created for Melissa and her peers, blossomed into an industry-leading training model adopted by other airlines nationwide. But the real impact was harder to measure. It lived in moments. The smile from a flight attendant who finally felt seen, the calm in a passenger who no longer feared prejudice, the quiet dignity of a woman who had reclaimed her place in the skies. Later that evening, Alana sat on the balcony of her San Francisco penthouse. The city lights sparkled like scattered stars, the bay below shimmering softly. Her phone buzzed, a message from Ava. "Mommy, I'm proud of you." Alana smiled, the fatigue in her bones momentarily lifting. She typed back, "I'm proud of you too. Sweetheart, keep flying high." Her thoughts drifted back over the journey from bruised cheeks to boardrooms, from whispered doubts to bold transformation. She touched the faint, fading bruise on her cheek, a quiet reminder that even wounds could become wisdom. And then she looked out at the horizon, at the endless sky that still held so much promise. A knock at the door startled her. It was Reese. He held a small package. "For you." Alana unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph of Polaris Flight 901, the very plane she had flown just weeks ago. Inscribed beneath was a quote she had written, "We don't need bigger planes. We need braver skies." Tears welled. "It's a reminder," Reese said softly, "of how far we've come and how far we have to go." Alana nodded. Yes, a reminder that every seat belongs, that dignity can't be downgraded, and that change is always possible even when the turbulence feels endless. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, the story of Polaris and of Alana Brooks was just beginning, a story of resilience, reckoning, and renewal, a story that would inspire generations who dared to believe that the sky was not the limit, but a beginning, not the end, because the fight for justice and dignity never truly lands, it simply rises again. As Alana closed her eyes, a gentle breeze whispered through the open window. It carried the scent of salt and possibility. She breathed in deeply and exhaled with quiet certainty. I belong here, and so does everyone else. Zoe Montgomery's journey reminds us all that discrimination isn't always loud. It can be a quiet, painful shadow that lingers even in the brightest rooms. But her story also shows the incredible power of transformation, how one woman's strength, compassion, and vision can dismantle systems of bias and build something better. This isn't just about a slap on a plane. It's about every person who has been underestimated, ignored, or made to feel less than human because of their race, gender, or background. It's about demanding respect, fostering understanding, and choosing growth over vengeance. If Zoe's story touched your heart, if it made you reflect or sparked a desire for change, please like this video, share it with those who need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that confront injustice and inspire hope. The journey towards true equality is long, but together, we can soar higher. Stay with us for the next story that will move you, challenge you, and remind us all why standing up matters.